Hey, welcome to Live America podcast. This is Hatem, and Noam Dworman will join us in a few moments. Um Happy Hanukkah and holidays and all that, and hope things are good with everybody those crazy days. We have the very funny Boris Khaykin is here, comedian and good friend. Hello, Boris.
Hello, good to be here.
Good to see you, man. Been a while. And by a while, I mean 2 days.
Saturday. Yeah.
And our guest of honor, the return. It's been a long time, my friend. Zaid Jilani. Zaid is back. Good to see you, man. It's been a while.
Yeah, happy to be here.
So Zaid is a solution reporter at News Nation, former reporter at the Intercept, and he previously also worked as a reporter blogger for ThinkProgress and much, much more. And I love his writing. I love his work in the internet. And he's one of the people you should follow on Twitter all the time. And he haven't been to New York since we haven't in the show. He saw claims. We'll see. How you been, man? Everything good?
No, it's good. I need to make it up to New York, really. I was sort of shocked when I thought about it. I was like, I haven't been in a while, and it's not the kind of place you can avoid. Always something's happening there. So
Yeah, I think the last time we were talking about was it the Georgia election at that time when you were moving or like perfect timing, I guess, right?
I was in the DC area for a long time, probably like a decade or so. But I grew up in Atlanta, so we moved back to Atlanta. I want to say around 2022. So yeah, it's been back for a while enough to where it doesn't feel weird being back. But yeah, it's definitely different and a little bit more of a hop skip away from New York now. So
Yeah. Any plans for New Year's Eve?
I don't think so, honestly. I was in Vegas recently, and that was actually really nice. Because they're kind of recovering from COVID now, and it's really booming. And I saw this enormous sphere that they built, like a huge globe, and you can put basically any video you want on it. I saw all kinds of videos on it. And it just kind of amazes me because, like, do we make like wonders of the world anymore in terms of buildings? Like, I don't know. I can't really think of like a really miraculous skyscraper or anything, but I was kind of impressed by the giant
Yeah.
sphere. So I guess that's what we're doing now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the New World Trade Center was a real letdown for everybody.
Yeah. Mhm.
Well, yeah, I don't know why.
Because it wasn't even like the biggest building anymore, It
Yeah.
was like too much freedom stuff going on. Freedom Tower on like Liberty Boulevard. They're
Oh,
trying too hard and yet not enough.
yeah.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the case. Like now we associate the tallest buildings also with like, oh, those are going to be in China, right? Or they're going to be in like the Emirates or something, right? Like
Right.
we don't even necessarily think the tallest building will be in America anymore, right? So that's just doesn't seem like what we're aspiring for these days.
Yeah, I think with the way, like with Dubai going also with the tallest, the biggest, that it's not even like it's like what's the point? Like New York is are you guys there?
We are.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah, I can hear you. Okay.
You're back.
Oh, okay. I think I you froze
We
for a
can't
second.
even get the most stable internet anymore, let alone the tallest buildings.
It's true. It's true. And I don't know why is that. That's kind of annoying. All right, so let's start so much to talk about, obviously, but one of the articles that you wrote recently and I or update recently as well, and I think it's very relevant to what's going on right now. And it's here we go. I'll stop. The article was titled "Why Underreporting of Hate Crimes Remains a Problem," and you talk about like well, first of all, we're going to discuss why it's people don't report it and why it's become a problem. So, I suggest a lot of people read the article. It's a beautiful article. So, we'd start like right now. Do you think, like, just in general, before we start even that, do you think that events bring hates to people's heart, or the hate is always there? Like I always think like if somebody
Yeah,
anti-Semitic or Islamophobic or racist, it's always there. It
right.
just or does it make new people?
It's a really good question. And honestly, it's like harder to answer than you might think on first glance because um, you know, I did a fellowship at UC Berkeley in their Greater Good. It's called Greater Good Science Center. So I wrote articles about social and political polarization for a year and a half, and I interviewed a ton of psychologists who work on these things. including folks who work on like hate crimes and prejudice. And actually, one of my bosses over at Berkeley, he like edited a book called, it was something like "Are People Born Racist" or something, and it was like a ton of essays of people dissecting this exact question. And I think that some people probably have personality proclivities that make them more likely to do these kinds of things. Like, think about how many people might have a negative stereotype in their mind, right? But think about how many people might actually go out and do something because of that. Probably very small.
Boris, what's your thoughts?
Or
Oh, I'm sorry.
event example, I think feeling a little bit. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. For some reason, I don't know. My internet is fucked up. It seems like you stopped talking, but you were just pausing. Go ahead, keep going.
All right, yeah. So I think it's probably a little bit of both. I think some people probably do have some of that underlying sentiment or just a personality type to kind of think that way or to act out in that way. But I do think that events get exacerbated. It kind of acts as a trigger for a lot of people, I think. And that's why I think you've seen an increase in both anti-Semitic incidences and Islamophobic incidences and related things, I think, to that since the war started happening overseas. Because I think a lot of people see that on the television, they see it in their smartphones. I mean, now we live in a time where news is ubiquitous, right? It isn't the time of our parents where maybe they'd watch the news at night, once a week or something, and that was it. Now we're constantly bombarded with like every second, every instance of often terrifying images of knowing all these negative things are happening in the world. And I do think that negativity impacts people. I did a story actually also when I was at the Berkeley Fellowship about mass shootings, and someone actually studied it, and they found that there were more mass shootings after the news starts covering one intensely, right? Like you could almost predict that there would be another few that would happen after one was in the news for a while, right? And it kind of brings the same question to mind, like, well, those people doing the mass shootings, like, did they already have a personality? They already had it in their mind to do something like that, but then they saw it on the news and they felt like they should go out and do it now, or did it actually kind of entice them or radicalize them in some way? I mean, it's a hard question to answer, but I think there probably is some link between those two things, as well as like there being an underlying, I think, sentiment in a lot of people that probably is expressed more in times like this.
Welcome, Noam.
Hi, can you hear
I
me?
know.
Yeah, we
Hey.
can hear you. So we're talking about Zaid's article that I sent, why underreporting of hate crimes remains a problem. We're talking about, how that my first question was, do you think that the news and stuff like that makes people like, or events make people more racist, like, anti-Semitic, race, anti-gay, Islamophobic, all that, or is it more they have in their heart already? Boris, you want to go and then we'll go, no?
Sure. I think like chaos and instability and people having their nerves up makes that kind of stuff flare out. I think when people feel like either, and the perception of chaos too, right? Because I think that a lot of times everything can be relatively the same, but if it feels like there's more news reporting of a certain thing, or it feels like shit's about to break loose, I think people are much more prone to like go to those basic instincts. As far as like hate goes, I mean, like it this is like a fundamental thing, right? Is like categorizing people and having shortcuts for how people behave. And so I think that like when you don't have enough data, or I'm curious how intelligence plays into it. Actually, this is probably throwing a question back at Zaid or you guys, but like to me, it seems like a lot of that stuff comes from categorizing people based on like shortcuts. But if you're dumb or you don't have a good data set, you might jump to things. There's a lot of really intelligent people that have crazy racist scribes and like really bigoted theories about the world. And so I don't know. Personally, I'm not even that offended by like someone like, I don't know, hating Jews or something like that, or like different types of bigotry. I just don't want those people to hold political power. And I don't want those people to be in a society where they feel like, I don't care about some guy who's like a plumber feeding his family and then says some shit about Jews when he goes home and has a beer with his friends. Like, I don't love it, but like, I just don't want society getting to a place where that guy feels like he's got to start doing shit about it.
But that person can also be a policeman, can be like a little, No,
yeah, ideally he's not a policeman. That's also a good point.
Yeah.
No, that was actually, I remember I watched an older video of some civil rights movement leaders, folks from everything from Urban League to Southern Christian Leadership Conference. I don't remember exactly what year it was or the context, but they were actually discussing that question that Noam brought up. They were like, they were asking them, so are you guys going to make like racism go away? Are you going to make white people stop being racist? And they were like, no, actually, we don't care that much about that. Like, people have these sentiments that they've always had. What we really care about is that is the law going to reinforce racism? Is it going to give it power, or is it going to take it away? Right? Like they were much more concerned about, is the distribution of power and the protection of the law such that people's racism can really hurt and kill people, can denigrate their dignity by denying them opportunities, so on and so forth. Or is the law against that stuff to where, the sentiments still exist? It's just a lot more harmless, right? Which is why I think that, like, I don't know, when I watch like a Chris Rock set or something, right, or someone equivalent to that, I don't feel like super threatened if he makes some jokes about Muslims or whatever, because I don't think Chris Rock is like going to go out and like do a Dylan Roof style or a Christchurch, New Zealand style shooting, right? I think he's making jokes and like we're having fun, right? Like I don't see it. Even if someone in the audience really does like, I don't know, have some negative sentiment or something, it's like whatever, right? But if that was like, I don't know, the president of the United States doing that, and he was doing that, introducing a policy that, I don't know, would deport like half of the Muslims in America, I think that'd be a little bit more of a concern, right? And I think sometimes the left, by trying to completely reach into people's minds and wipe out like every kind of ill thought, I think they go overboard, right? And they kind of miss what's important, in terms of addressing a lot of the more structural problems, which I think are really the root of a lot of like what the civil rights movement was really trying to address. Of course, they wanted to improve people's attitudes. Of course, they wanted wider acceptance of African Americans and other minorities. But I think those structural issues were really what they were going at, and it still remains the most important thing, in my opinion. I mean, even like growing up in Atlanta, right? Like, I think when I lived in DC for a long time, among a lot of people who lived there, most of whom were Democrats, they would associate being Black with being poor. And if you just walk around DC, you can kind of understand why they have that perception, because like it's a highly segregated society. The eastern half, if you walk into it, tends to be very poor. And if you just keep going for a certain amount, like walking on foot, you just don't see any more white people. It's just like, oh, in your mind, you think, okay, the Black half of the city is poor. Growing up in Atlanta area, I didn't really ever feel that way, because I was surrounded by like Black middle class people, by very successful businessmen and entertainers and people who worked in news media, so on and so forth. So I think I just never created that perception. And part of this was like, there's a different power relationship where you actually pursued and created like a Black middle class, right? Where I think people might make like kind of racy jokes with each other about race or whatever, but I don't think anyone feels super threatened by it a lot down here, just because like, it doesn't feel like we are reflecting something we're doing to people in reality, right? Which would be keeping people down, denying them opportunity, denigrating them in ways which, did happen in the American South for centuries. But I think which has cleared up quite a bit simply because they changed the root of what the structure was in this region, to where I think people don't automatically, see themselves set off in relationships like that. So yeah, that's a very long-winded way of saying I agree with Noam and the comment that he made with regards
That
to
was
this.
actually Boris. No, Noam is right here. Hi, Noam. So what's your thoughts
Hi.
on that, Noam?
I'm not sure I understand the question. What's the
So the
question?
question was, we're talking about the article, but before that, I asked him, do you think that people already, like, because of like, you think of all the news, people become more anti-Semitic or more, or they always been like that, with all races, not only, the article is why under reporting the hate crimes remains a problem. But do you think that people with all, had the hate always in their heart and they just didn't see it? Or show it, and now it's a chance, or you think this is bringing it in people?
Well, I think mostly. I mean, yeah, I think they already have it mostly in their heart. I don't. What would have created it?
Like events in general, like that, obviously the war right now, or if there's mass shooting, or like whatever it is, like something, and it just become you see like something and you want to be part of it, so you want to be like, oh, you know what, now I do this. But I personally believe that people that hate certain group of people are always been there, it's always been there in their hearts.
Yeah, I think that's right.
So okay, so about the your article, why reporting of hate crimes remain a problem. So why is that, I think there's a lot of community, like I know that, the African American community, the Hasidic Jews, like they don't report problems. So
Right.
the stats that we have is not real.
Yeah, so I think there's like two sides of it, right? So I interviewed one of the people who helped the FBI compose the first hate crime statistics report, which was released, I believe, in 1990. And basically, what he said is there's kind of two halves. Like one is certain communities, I think, are just very reticent to talk to police about these things, or they don't internalize them as hate crimes, right? Like you mentioned, one was Hasidic Jews. I think a lot of, like, if you're a Hasidic Jew in New York City and like you're accosted by some kid on the street or so on and so forth, you just think, oh, that's life. You know, people treat us that way sometimes. You may not internalize it as a crime. Or, you know, other communities, they made it, maybe they'll just distrust the police. Like a lot of times, for instance, like immigrants who don't have papers, right? Like a lot of them just don't go to the police for anything because they're scared about their legal status, right? So I think among certain communities for that reason, that's half of why you have the underreporting of crimes. The other half is that I think, and this is something the people I spoke to who've been working on this issue for several decades have told me, is that a lot of times police just don't take these things seriously. Like they don't record them as events that are worth noting. Like, okay, someone shoved someone else, someone did some graffiti somewhere, right? Like that's just like all they will mark or write about these things, or they won't ask the right questions to really ascertain or determine that it was maybe a bias motivated incident. So I think the combination of those two things has been around for a while. I think probably has improved over time. I think from the people I spoke to, since this issue started being taken seriously, probably in the 80s or 90s by police, there has been an improvement in terms of reporting on this. But most people you would talk to would say, when the FBI releases their annual report of like bias incidents, that's probably a huge undercount. Like especially for like the groups that are really on the margins that like probably just don't have that much contact with police, because they're all going based off of like filed police reports and incidents that went through the system. There is another report called the National Criminal Victimization Survey, and sometimes you'll see maybe 10 times higher reporting on that. But that's based off like self-reporting, just surveying people, did this happen to you in this time span, so on and so forth. Of course, that has problems too, because sometimes people will interpret something as a bias incident that maybe really wasn't. Probably the truth is somewhere in between in terms of what actually happened. But I do think that when you look at like the FBI stats and we say, oh, this is the breakdown of it, like, you know, we should take it with a grain of salt just for these reasons.
Any thoughts on that from Noam or Boris? Okay, so Noam, since you're not staying for a long time, what would you like? I have a list you can choose, or we can talk about whatever you want. I want to
do
talk
have a
about the
quick-
Harvard, MIT.
I do have a quick question on this actually, because I'm
Sure.
personally kind of torn on it in terms of just like the value of categorizing things as hate crimes in general. Because my first instinct, I almost see it as like banning smoking inside. Like my libertarian side, when they first did that, was like, they shouldn't be telling businesses what to do. And then as soon as they did it, I'm like, this is way better and less people are smoking very quickly than like years of propaganda could have accomplished. And same thing with hate crimes. My instinct is like, if somebody jumped me on the street, do I really care if it was because I'm a Jew or it's for some other reason? I'd rather just like, it not be jumped on the street. But like once that's happened, do I care that much, whether it's because of my group categorization? But then obviously, when you talk about it in the context of this stuff, like how important is that, do you think?
Well, I'm just gonna jump quickly in this. I think maybe it doesn't bother you, but it could bother a lady walking with her baby, or can bother an older man, or could bother somebody. We saw this guy that was, in my neighborhood in Williamsburg, who was like a very older man, wearing the Jewish, stuff, and he got punched in the, very old. You know what I'm saying? So maybe that
No, it's
hate.
terrible. I'm not
No,
saying
I'm
it
saying,
shouldn't
but
be
it
a
doesn't
crime.
bother you. But that same person, the one that does it, is the one that becomes maybe more empowered to do stuff like that and getting away with it.
I guess what Noam is saying though is like,
So this is Boris, by the
I'm
way. So
Boris,
here-
yeah.
is the bias motivation, is that part of it as important as the fact they committed the crime?
Right.
Which, I mean, that's also part of it. Like, I think sometimes prosecutors don't want to try to make these cases because it's really hard to prove that it was bias motivated. Like, for instance, in 2021, we saw a lot of videos of Asian elders being attacked. Most of those cases didn't result in any hate crime charges. And the reason why is because the assailant never said anything. They never were like, oh yeah, I just want to go attack an Asian person. Or I read this op-ed from like several years ago in the Bay Area where a kid who used to rob Asians was like, no, we're not racist. It's just that the Asians have all the money. And it's like, is that a hate crime then? Like, you're targeting Asians because you think they have money, although you have nothing against Asians, but you are targeting them, right? So at a certain point, it does kind of get complicated. And I agree, at least from a law enforcement point of view, we just don't want people hurting each other or committing crimes, right? Like, doesn't matter whether it's for bias or malice or just indifference or whatever. But it is probably useful for us to kind of figure out the ambient level of just like, are people beefing with each other? Are people targeting each other? Are people spray painting synagogues and mosques and, doing that kind of stuff? I think it might be useful for us to know if that stuff's happening, just so that we can, as a society, try to mend fences with people and get people to take the temperature down. In terms of the law enforcement side, in terms of like stopping these crimes, I'm not sure it's that important whether or not you bring the hate crime charges in particular versus just bringing charges and stopping the crime.
All right. Your mic is off now.
I think that hate crimes, I'm just thinking this for the first time now, it's done more harm than it's done good. It's created a lens that everybody has internalized without even realizing it, that every time now somebody black does or somebody white does something to somebody black, it's presumed to have been racial. It's something obviously that has been is emphasized when it suits the kind of intersectional narrative, but then it's an uncomfortable albatross that's tried to squirm out from under when the Jews are actually by far the number one victim of hate crimes. And by the way, to be fair, I'm not convinced that that the rivalry between blacks and Jews in some neighborhood in Brooklyn where the Hasidic community is obviously, get on their nerves, that it's even, I'm not sure what to describe that as. I mean, I in some sense, I'm sure they get had it up to here with Hasids, and that can lead to outbursts. But does that mean that these people are anti-Semites? Or it asks for a degree of mind reading, which is not realistic. And as I said, it's going to be weaponized when it's convenient for narrative. I do think it's worthwhile keeping track of incidents of racism and bigotry and anti-Semitism, just as so we know what's going on in the country. But I don't think, and yeah, I mean, if you kick the shit out of somebody, I don't think you should get less time because you didn't do it because you only did it because you thought they were ugly, or like, or whatever reason.
It reminds me, there was that one serial killer who killed a whole bunch of people, and then he was like, "But I'm not racist," right? He's like, he happened to kill a bunch of black guys as part of his killing, like disproportionate. I mean, and he's like, "But I'm not racist," and I'm like, "Is that really the important part? You just killed so many people."
And what I would say is that we really under punish violent crime in this country. The trauma that people suffer when they're the victim of menacing crime, even if they're not actually hurt, just the terrifying experience that they go through is really under considered, So I would up the penalties for that, regardless of the hate of it all. But yeah, I'm not a big fan of hate crime stuff.
And I would have also they cannot do any Netflix specials because it glorified the killing and stuff like that in a way.
I mean, you see what I'm saying? Or you want to talk about the Harvard stuff? I mean, the Harvard, the universities, it's a perfect example. It's not a hate crime, but it's a perfect analogy to it, which is that for years we've been seeing this reaction to the hate speech, the microaggressions, the trigger warnings, all this stuff when it suited a particular narrative. And then as soon as they had to react to it when it came to Jews, they were heading for the exits. They're trying to figure out something. All of a sudden they embraced the First Amendment. All of a sudden they sounded like Elon Musk defending his new rules on Twitter. Like really, Gay and McGrath, or was that her name, McGrath? They were actually saying the same stuff that Elon Musk has been saying for years, and everybody was attacking Musk, right? So, well, like we don't just because people are advocating ideas like genocide doesn't mean that we can't let them talk. Which by the way, I would lean in that direction. Let people say whatever they want, but it's just interesting how that it was so obvious that they were trying to get out from under this expectation that they've been creating for years.
I'm surprised they didn't explicitly just follow up the question of, that is a call for genocide of Jews against university policy, literally just replace it explicitly and just follow it up with, is the call for genocide of black people or enslaving black
Oh,
people.
so they did
They did
ask
that.
that. They did ask that,
Yeah.
but then as soon as they started answering, they cut them off, which
Oh,
which kind of tells me that, these are still politicians. I think there's some legitimate points being made, but they're still politicians doing political stuff, right?
For sure,
And
for
like
sure.
and a lot of these, unfortunately, a lot of these Capitol Hill hearings, I think they're mostly made for TV cameras, right? So they want the right soundbite and like.
It really
yeah.
was amazing that these three people who've risen to the top of three of the most important academic institutions on planet Earth were just barely a notch above a Department of Motor Vehicles person trying to defend a dumb policy. Like,
isn't that crazy? That's exactly what I was thinking.
I mean, really, can you picture Larry Summers, whatever pickle he was in? Could you imagine him? He was president of Harvard at one time, answering in such a robotic, just idiotic way, lawyered up. I mean, this is just a disgrace. And now people are saying it's racist, which is a double disgrace. As if Claudine Gay were only white or something, people like me would be, oh, that was a very good answer. That's very good, Claudine. It's so stupid. What a terrible answer. She's a disgrace.
But the problem also,
and she plagiarized.
The problem also is they sort of, I think you'll agree with us, that they, based on what you're saying, they backed themselves into a corner, because the real mistake wasn't even necessarily what happened in that room. The real mistake was the years leading up to it of pretending to have any sort of, rules or consistent ideology.
Yeah, Harvard can have whatever policy it wants on speech. It's, I think they can have whatever policy they want on speech, but whatever policy they have, they should apply it uniformly.
I'm not sure what applying it uniformly means, though, because like I feel like the comparisons being made are somewhat unequal, because you're like, okay, they don't like misgendering, which I also think is stupid. You can say whatever you want about misgendering, but like I'm pretty sure all elite universities have employed people like Henry Kissinger, Condoleezza Rice, so on and so forth, like people that I'm sure that Muslim students or Cambodian students were pissed at or didn't like because of their views on foreign policy, but like I don't think they could get them fired either, right? I think when it comes to foreign policy,
I'm not talking about firing anybody for their views on foreign policy.
No, but I'm talking about foreign policy.
Yeah, but that wasn't.
We're talking about a foreign policy conversation, right? I've never heard of any elite university firing anyone because they thought that they were involved in too many wars that too many Muslims died in, or too many Cambodians died in, or too many people in Vietnam, or censoring their speech. I mean, I've never heard of Henry Kissinger's speech being censored anywhere, even when students would come and yell at him about Cambodia. So I think when it comes to foreign policy, universities actually generally are consistent, and I think they should be. By the way, I don't think Henry Kissinger should be censored. People can call him a jackass to his face if they want to. That's First Amendment too.
Hold on.
I didn't say anything about foreign policy.
Hold on. We didn't say anything about foreign policy, nor was that
the entire hearing was about foreign policy. They're all talking. They're all interpreting Palestinian slogans and arguments about Israel as genocide, which I think is stupid.
That's not foreign policy. That's not foreign policy.
It is literally about foreign policy. No one is saying I'm very angry about American Jews.
Well, no, I think there's some
Palestine and Israel.
Wait, hold on.
Contorted
but
hold on. This other thing, right?
Hold on, Boris. Just hold on.
Which is why I find the conversation just so superficial when you're saying, oh, they don't allow misgendering, but they will allow a conversation about Israel. They all.
Just 1 second, please.
Israel speakers not allowed on campus.
Can you stop for 1 second, please? First of all, the question they were asking about was, is it okay to advocate genocide of Jews? That's not a foreign policy question. Number one.
Yes, it is, because they were referring to Palestinian slogans, right?
No, previously.
They weren't,
no.
That's what they were referring to. Did you watch the hearing?
Please, let me finish.
The entire hearing.
If
the facts aren't being stated here correctly, I do have to correct it. I'm sorry. They also asked about genocide of blacks. They started to answer.
Can you stop for a second?
Yeah, let Noam.
They gave the exact same answer, though.
I'm going, Hatem. Bye. I'm going.
No, see you now.
No, go ahead.
What? No, I got time.
Please. I'm sorry. I interrupted. No, please go ahead.
But I really don't have time. The question started out about River to the Sea, which is not a foreign policy question, but
are they talking about the Mississippi River? Are they talking about the Atlantic Ocean?
No. If you if you,
I'm sorry, but I feel like we have to live in reality here, and a lot of
I'm not going to get a word in.
conversation is
I'm not
not
going
in
to get
reality.
Zaid, Noam
The
have to go
conversation is
because
not reality.
hold on, because
No,
Noam
I'm
have to
sorry.
go.
I don't want to
You can't
interrupt.
keep, you
Sorry.
can't keep saying you're sorry and then do it again and again.
Yeah, just let him
Very true.
say his
Very
point.
true.
Yeah, thank you. Go ahead, Noam.
But I'll get sucked into this. If somebody tells me that they think that Israel should be revoked, or that that's not a foreign. They're not foreign policy involves decisions of the United States of America as a government, a foreign policy. That is not every opinion somebody has about the world or about the founding of the Jewish state is not a foreign policy question. That's a history question. If it's an absurd way to put it. If people who think that if I think that what happened to the Native Americans was awful and that they should get something in return, or if I believe in reparations for Black people, this is not a foreign policy question. This is a moral question. But they were talking about River to the Sea, but then there was a break, and then they came back, and she expanded it very obviously to an ad absurdum question, which she didn't. And if you read what she said, she thought they were going to answer, of course, it's against our policy. She was shocked as anyone else that they couldn't say that. And as far as Kissinger and those guys, they don't fire people like that, but they don't hire people like that. And there's been countless cases of guests disinvited from. If you read why it is that Harvard came in last in the fire speech, one of the reasons was because of disinviting of guests, and we know people like Charles Murray, whatever it is, all sorts of people. But on top of that, they fired, for instance, Ronald Sullivan, who was an attorney, who was a dean of the dorm there, and he got fired from that position because he was defending Harvey Weinstein. So in one case, you have Harvard taking action against a defense attorney doing his job, and then another case, not sure about whether it's okay to advocate genocide of Jews. So of course they're hypocrites. I'm not even sure how you could say otherwise.
Well, I guess would they be hypocrites unless they didn't allow? I mean, I guess is there only a binary of where they wouldn't allow any speech at all, or they would allow all speech. Otherwise, if they take either position, they're not hypocrites, right? I mean, I agree with you. I think they should allow all speech. I mean, I'm basically absolutist about it. But I think saying that, we have to include a few things that happened in this hearing, and I hate to defend these people because I don't like what they do either. But they asked them the exact same question about Blacks and genocide, and they started to get the same answer, and then they cut them off and moved on to another question because that wasn't the gotcha, right? So I don't know that they actually were inconsistent. And
they're inconsistent like said, with their behavior over the last number of years.
No, I don't think so, though, because they don't fight. I mean, I never heard of people being censored for saying that, Palestinians should be expelled from the Palestinian territories, which there are right-wing speakers like Ben Shapiro who say that all the time. And by the way, there are students who protest Ben Shapiro, and I think they're wrong to not try to ask him not to be allowed to speak. But he did speak at Berkeley 6 years ago. I think he was right to speak at Berkeley, right to be allowed to speak at Berkeley, so on and so forth. I mean,
let me. I want to move quickly to Boris also because I know we have known for a little bit time, so I want to just cover a couple of things. Boris, what's your thoughts on this?
When did Ben Shapiro said? Ben Shapiro believes that Palestinians should be expelled?
Yeah, he has a column called "Transfer is Not a Dirty Word," and that's why Jeffrey Goldberg, who's the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic, who's I would say is right of center on this topic. He served in the IDF. Once called Ben Shapiro a fascist for that opinion. I don't, that's a strong language. I don't like throwing those words around, but he's extremely right wing on this topic. He does speak at universities. If any university tries to block him, I agree with you. They should not try to block him. But I'm not so sure that universities have a great track record when it comes to if a Muslim student or an Arab student says this speaker has too extreme of a view towards Palestine, we shouldn't allow him to speak. 9 times out of 10, they're allowed to speak. I think that in general, when it comes to that topic, universities are kind of a free-for-all. I agree with you on a bunch of other topics. they're not quite a free for all. And I also agree with you that it should be more of a free for all. I think it's ridiculous that Harvard actually fired someone for doing their job. It's literally a defense attorney's job to defend people. Is it Harvard Law School's position that the defense attorney shouldn't exist? That no matter what crime you're accused of, that you can't go to court and have someone to defend you? It's actually the law that someone has to defend you. What is a public defender? Do they think public defenders shouldn't exist?
Boris,
One of the ridiculous counter arguments I heard about that was like, well, why can't Weinstein just get a public defender? And then I asked that person, well, what if the public defender wants to work at Harvard later? Are they not going to be allowed to because they defended Harvey Weinstein? So I agree with you. All that stuff's messed up, man. And you and I are basically the same person on that position. So,
Boris, what's your thoughts quickly?
Well, I'll just say this. I don't know
Not quickly, but
specific.
I didn't know that about Ben Shapiro. What a jackass! I don't know. Does he still hold that position, or that was his position?
I hope not. But
Well, yeah. So, I mean, I think we're all fairly in agreement that the ideal would be basically free speech for all to the highest degree possible. I don't know enough concrete examples with Harvard. I do know that there's definitely been like, for like memes going around and shit like that, like students have had applications rescinded. I don't know enough like of the specific examples to like, compare them in these distinct ways. But culturally, I think it's very clear at the least that even outside of this, to me, it seems like a very obvious large contingent of people who would vocally protest against using like master bedroom and slave drive, and very clearly don't have the same lens that they're viewing phrases like river to the sea. I personally don't find it to be inherently genocidal or anything like that. Like you said, half of these people don't know which river and which sea they're talking about. The students chanting, even global intifadas.
I got to say something about that. Okay, go. First of all, I as much as a free speech guy as I am, I don't think people should be able to on Harvard advocate for the genocide of any group of people.
Period. Right, but again, there's a difference between saying, I am advocating for the genocide of the Jews.
That was the question. The question asked was the question. Sure. She was asked the question she was asked, and people want to pretend that she wasn't asked that question. We all saw it. Everybody knew what they were saying. It's a perfectly typical line of strategy when you're questioning somebody. When they give you an answer on one thing, to expand it out to see what their limiting principle is. It's not a trick. It's certainly not pulling a fast one on a president of Harvard University. Say, well, you believe in this? You believe in abortion in the first 3 months? Well, how do you feel about 9 months? Oh, you tricked me. No, it's a perfectly like, okay, where is your bottom? But as far as so I would say that nobody should allow to advocate genocide of anyone. But as far as these ambiguous terms, river to the sea, anti-Zionism,
globalize the intifada, without regard to whether or not they should be have speech codes attached to them, I think there's something very foul and disgusting going on there that all decent people should be able to recognize and object to, and it's the following. There is a strategic ambiguity of language being used here. By purposely adopting phrases that can be taken either way, and then feeling no obligation to tell anybody what you mean by it. So yes, intifada means uprising in Palestine, in Arabic, but it also is very closely associated, most recently, with 1,000 innocent civilians being blown up by suicide bombs. So when you say globalize the intifada, any normal person says, wait a second, what do you mean by that? You mean nonviolent protests, or do you mean the intifada? Because most of us who know the word intifada only know about it because of that. We don't speak Arabic, and neither do you, by the way, most you dumb typical protester out there. So what do you mean by that? When you say you're an anti-Zionist, do you mean you oppose Israel's policies, or do you mean you want to see Israel gone? It's apparently now a lot of people who said they were, no, I'm not anti-Semitic, I'm just an anti-Zionist. Well, now, it's pretty clear a lot of them were hiding under that label. When you say river to the sea, what do you mean by that? So in normally decent people
when they're using language which can be reasonably construed as violent, genocidal, you name it, as unbecoming, feel an obligation to say, listen, when I use intifada, don't think I mean violence. When I say anti-Zionism, don't think I hate you. No, there's a polite company but that's what's happening here. So, for instance, I asked Aaron Mate more than once and in a personal email, when you say globalize the intifada, do you mean nonviolent protest? And what do you think he answered? He won't answer.
Right.
Which is, so I say this kind of thing should be heavily stigmatized, because this is a game which no person should be playing in good faith. There are perfectly good phrases to use to describe an acceptable version of these things and an unacceptable version of things. Now, you are entitled to advocate what I'm calling the unacceptable version. You're entitled to advocate genocide. You're entitled to advocate suicide bombing. You're entitled to advocate the eradication of Israel from river to the sea. But if we're dealing in good faith here, people should be required to say what they mean and not resort to this kind of game. And that's what it is. It's a verbal game, and it's bullshit. That's what I say about it. But it should be legal, of course. And I'm done.
When they say, like, in the hearing, are you advocating for the genocide? What was the action that they were assuming that was taking place that says genocide? Was it the river to the sea part? Or
no, she was asking a hypothetical question of how far do you want to take this? What are your limits about what people can say?
Well, yeah.
And by the way, just to be clear, it wasn't a speech code. What she said was, wouldn't this be bullying and harassment? And I think it is. If somebody said, put blacks back in chains, and I would say, no fucking university should allow that.
But what if they say it calmly and academically? No.
You
don't have to yell it like that.
Imagine you're out there and you have some people out there carrying signs, re-enslave black people, bring back the Middle Passage. And then some black people.
This is going to be clipped. This is going on Instagram.
Yeah, imagine and they said, and black people have to walk to class. Of course, that's no way to run a university. You can't allow that. There's no intellectual argument going on there. You're trying to bully and harass people. We can call that out.
But also, I have a question, because I see this a lot, and when I see Noam asking a lot of people, what do you mean by intifada? Why do you mean by? Do you feel that people should be explaining themselves? No, like the obvious meaning of it is a peaceful resisting uprising and stuff like that. So should everybody keep explaining, okay, this is what I mean by it, what I mean?
I'll springboard off Noam, just because I think the strategic ambiguity, though I don't necessarily disagree with it, I don't think we even need that framing. To me, it's just, if you look at this group of people as a political entity and what the ethos has been when it comes to language up till now, a lot of it has been listening to the people who are claiming that this language is offensive to them type of phrasing.
But what does intifada has to do with anything?
What do you mean? The intifada was a bunch of suicide bombers.
No, that's what bureaucratic. If you put it in intifada means uprising. Intifada started with the children throwing rocks.
But to people that don't speak the language, again, my point isn't even like
what are the majority. A great solution, translate it. But you know why they don't? Because it's scarier in Arabic.
Well, so
that's why they keep it.
And it's a cool, listen, I'm not going to lie. Intifada sounds cool. It sounds like a pretty cool word. But like in general, I'm just saying a lot of the people who say these things are people that don't want you using words like master bedroom. They're people with language, ideas on language that were so different with this.
One of them. Go ahead. Go. Sorry.
I was just going to say, even outside of intifada, like from the river to the sea, again, lots of ways to interpret it. I think a lot of people that said it have no idea what river and what sea they're referring to.
Yeah.
But when you have enough of a cohort of people that do say in their charter that they want to annihilate all Jews, and those people
are Hamas.
But again, I'm saying these are the same people that say if Nazis agree with you. These are the same people that said punch Nazis. These are the same people that that said, hey, over there marching with you are Nazis.
But it's the same. It's the same people that do mass shooting. If you read the transcript, it's the same thing. That doesn't mean that this is representing people. You know, one of the things, and then I know Zaid want to say something. One of the things that always Ben Shapiro that drives me crazy is always like when somebody asks him free Palestine, he's like, what is Palestine? Tell me what Palestine. How about what is free? Why don't you take the first part of it and tell us what is free the people mean? You know, Intifada started with the children over there. So when people try to say like, oh, what does it mean? What does it mean? What does it mean? Yeah, some people, of course, misuse it, but, you know, Zaid, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fair to ask people what they mean when they say something, but also when like thousands of people are using slogans, sometimes they mean different things using the exact same slogan. And that applies to literally everything involved in politics, from like people, for instance, like a certain number of people call themselves pro-life, but like they actually agree that abortion should be allowed in certain circumstances. And I think, but some people call themselves pro-life and they're like, I don't think abortion should be allowed in any circumstance. Like, I think, or maybe like life of the mother, right? Like most people agree with that exception, but like even with rape, they don't think it should be allowed. Teenagers shouldn't be allowed, blah, blah, whatever. So I think for a lot of these Middle Eastern debates, it's the same thing. Like I think that when a lot of people say Palestine should be free, some of them do mean like, okay, that means I think there shouldn't be an occupation, it should be two states. Some of them would mean I think that there should be a right of return and that Israel should have both Israelis and Palestinians living with one vote. And then some of them, probably the smallest number, but some people probably would just mean, yeah, we should just kick the Israelis out and the whole thing should be Palestine, right?
I agree.
And the fact that some people would use the same slogans that agree with all these different menu of options does make it difficult to understand what the other person is saying. But then, like, you just have to talk to people and ask them what they mean and what they say. I think it does mean different things for different people. And yeah, Noam's right that it does create ambiguity. I don't know that it's strategic though. I don't know that it's like a master plan from all these people. I think a lot of people are just saying the slogans that they. Oh, I'm sorry.
But here's the point also that I'm trying to make. I think we all agree on what he's saying, but at the same time, I feel like a lot of the protest is a reaction to civilians dying. You know, so they're trying to take that part away from it and say, oh, well, what do you mean by intifada? What do you mean by this? Why do you mean by this? Where the main focus should be ceasefire, stop killing, all that, you know. No one is denying what happened in, you know, the right to defend yourself. Nobody's denying the right to, you know, take Hamas as far as you want, but, you know, the civilians is a different story. So if people are reacting to the killing of civilians in a way, and they say something like intifada or whatever, and they, you know, like you said, a lot of like if there's 100,000 people in the protest, like most of them will mean something, the other half will mean something else, you know. But the main thing is like why they came together. They came together to protest the killing of the civilians. That's what I think. If the protest itself was caused because like, oh, we don't want, for no absolute reason, like no civilians die, nothing is happening, and then they go, I was like, oh shit, yeah, this is, what the hell, you know.
But that's also not entirely true to me. Like, to me, the emotion gets ramped up on both sides, to be fair. But I mean, for starters, a lot of people came together before there was any response on the Israeli side. And again, credit to them also, some of the response was fairly foreseeable. I mean, Hamas foresaw it. So a lot of people who are against killing of civilians foresaw Israel responding in a way where that would happen. But regardless, I think there's still, to me, the central thing is, again, I get everyone's emotionally heated. I can grant a lot of grace even to people using slogans that I might have disdain for. But to me, where the kind of gaslighting comes in are, again, the people that under other circumstances would have no grace for phrases that other people would use, that even to a minority of people, like, I don't know how many people are still hurt by some examples that we've had over the years of things that need to be eliminated from language. And here it just seems like there's a lot of talking past each other. But again, I hold the cohort responsible that I'd normally accept to be hypersensitive to language. I don't care that much one way or another what language you're using, and I agree. I would rather pursue a conversation and find the meaning behind it. But it feels like either a collapse of that value system that these people claim to have, or a weaponization of it.
And that's why I asked that question in the very beginning, is like, do you feel that some people are just racist and they want to, or anti-Semitic or Islamophobic or whatever, and whatever, you know, they're just waiting for the opportunity? So of course, when there's protests, I'm sure they're gonna, for either side, for any cause, they're gonna have some people involved in it that it's not, you know, not for the cause. But again, what started this whole thing, in my opinion. Like, if I see protests for no reason, just to, and for people say, uh,
But we can't even agree on that, right? If you ask a lot of people on one side, they'll say what happened on October 7th started the whole thing. If you ask a lot of people on another side, they'll say what preceded October 7th. Some will say since 1967, some will say since 1948,
yeah, but
and
it's
then
not
others
even
will
about
obviously.
I don't think at this point is about what started it, because that's always I think there's a lot of, when there's a conversation between like Israel and Palestine, it's always two things. It's like who was there first or who started. But I don't think it's about the starting or who was there first. I think about this one's particular is about the respond. The way it was responded. The respond was too much. The respond have no value to Palestinian life. They should 100% defend themselves. They should 100% do take Hamas and whoever did these crimes and do whatever, but not like that. That's what
Look, I think if there wasn't October 7th and then there wasn't this war, yeah, some people are interested in this issue and they're going to talk about it no matter what. But I think in terms of the roiling amount of, people blocking freeways, blah, 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 that is kind of an outgrowth of the current round of the conflict, the flaring up of the conflict, right? Because this conflict is very different than, like, okay, I don't know, Armenia, Azerbaijan, right? Like, they have diasporas, right, that are out there, and Armenian community in California, I'm sure, is very concerned about it, right? About what's happening in the border and so on and so forth. But like, this conflict, I think one thing that makes it like so inciting is that, like, look, you have the like cornerstone of three Abrahamic faiths in that strip of land, in that territory, right? And even though it's not a purely religious conflict, it's actually just a misnomer. A lot of people believe that. It does, I think, wrap a lot of people in for that reason. And that's not only true in the United States, it's true, I think, across the world. It might be less true in, I don't know, like Thailand or something that doesn't have as much cultural or religious ties to this. But yeah, Hatem, I think this is why I only come on the podcast once every 3 years, because you ask very difficult questions, right? When you ask, what causes this, what preceded that, I think it's a very complicated question in many ways. So
yeah, absolutely. But I like I said, I think this one is just more for the respond, and also I think has a lot to do with social media, because now we can actually see things right away, and and feel things right away, and that's also understandably, if you see what Hamas did with the videos and stuff like that, also the respond makes sense in a way for, but not to that level, so I think there's a lot of, but I think also my concern is like, which point that Noam brought earlier, and we were talking, it's like, how are these people are the president? If one of us were in this hearing, we would have a better answer than what they did. Boris, how do you feel about being Ukrainian and nobody talking about Ukraine anymore? We took all the fight.
I know. I thought I'd retire my Ukraine war jokes when the war ended, but instead a hotter, newer war showed up, and now we're old news.
Yeah,
I don't know. I don't have a high emotional reaction to these things, whether they're particularly close to me or not. I do think it's interesting. Ukraine in a very different way became part of the kind of like flag on the lawn of, in this house we believe type things. It was a much more, this is like, this has divided the Democratic Party in a way, even, in a way that Ukraine didn't. Ukraine had much more ubiquitous political support, except for really fringes, whereas I think this has divided people in a very different way. But as a Ukrainian, personally, I don't take it that seriously. Israel would welcome me more than Ukraine would, to be frank. So I can't entirely put all my cards in the Ukraine basket.
Well, you don't see yourself as Ukrainian as much.
I actually relate in this way to the Palestinians, in the sense that I think there's a lot of, like you said, people that'll be like, show me Palestine on a map, or I would actually argue, and I wouldn't get into it, but like the Palestinian nationalist movement is sort of different than the Palestinian cultural movement. And Ukraine relates to that in the way where like there wasn't a strong Ukrainian nationalist movement until this war sort of happened. It sort of, or maybe like a little bit before, but it kind of organically formed in a way that I think Putin underestimated in terms of a fighting force. And I think people on the pro-Israel side will point to or try to cherry pick certain lack of historical examples and try to use that to delegitimize Palestinian national identity. But it's kind of like when it forms, you sort of have to respect it regardless of when or how it happened, because that's the political reality at that point. And so I think Putin found that out. And I think that similarly in this conflict, it's something where even if you disagree with a certain historical aspects of it, I kind of relate the Ukrainians. I would get shit for saying this among certain family members, but I would relate it more to the Palestinians in the sense that the nationalist movement exists. And so now you sort of have to deal with that as a political reality, even if you don't agree with how that political reality forms, or if you think KGB might have had something to do with it at a certain point with Arafat or whatever else. It's sort of the political reality that you have to negotiate with at this point, because that's what the people living there want.
Boris, if I could ask, do you think that in Ukraine there will be any sentiment towards making a deal, or do you think that still people in Ukraine feel like they should fight until Russia is just ejected from the territory?
I don't have enough of a read on it personally. The people that I know, my dad has a friend there, his son there, they're surprisingly gung-ho. And these are not military type folks. This is like a short, borderline autistic computer programmer guy that I've known since I was a little kid that I would never see as a soldier. But I think like your guess as a human being in the world is basically that, yeah, I think they would negotiate at a certain point. I don't know exactly the details, but I know at one point that was something that was sort of on the table. And the reality is what it is. At a certain point, it's a lot of death.
Isn't it crazy that if there's, this is my personal belief, if there is different leaders at this point, rather than, the Ukrainian president or the Israeli prime minister or something like that, at this point, it could be a very good thing, because it could be a new beginning. You need new characters in the game. Somebody was like, okay, you know what? Let's stop. Let's start. Let's refresh. Let's do this. I think it's a lot about ego and stands and like political career stuff like that. Do you guys agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, Netanyahu's going to go one way or another. There's no way him or the top military brass in Israel in general is going to, once things calm down a little bit, survive much past this. It's going to be a Golda Meir situation where I think they're going to have to take the L. I mean, it's just he's denied responsibility explicitly up until now, but I don't think that's something that's sustainable. There was already such a huge faction that wanted him out there, so I can't imagine a world where he's in power for that much past this conflict.
What about Ukraine?
Man, I don't know. Zelensky's young. He's relatively speaking, maybe not winning the war, but he's done a good job raising money for it. So,
but I'm saying, like, as a politician, if you have a real politician, like, it could save lives and maybe
I don't know
Yeah.
because just that entire region, and you never know what could follow him, and it could easily be a Putin puppet. It could be someone like Yanukovych coming back. Like you just don't know, and so it's the same thing with people talking about Putin being gone. In normal circumstances, do not fear change and embrace it. But in that region, for me, it's just, you never know how much worse it could get. And they could do a lot worse than Zelensky, and they could still do worse than Putin in Russia.
Yeah, but you see, when I ask question, then what goes in is like, I'm being realistic. Putin's not going anywhere.
Unless he dies. My dad thinks he might be dead already.
What do you think, Zaid?
What do I think is going to happen with the Ukraine?
Yeah.
I mean, it's very hard to say. I think, it's a topic I don't spend a whole lot of time on because I don't have a lot of connections with it. I haven't done a whole lot of reporting on it. I do think, though, that there will most likely end up being a deal, simply because if you look at the territory that switched hands between the sides in the past, like 6 months to a year, it's not very much. And there isn't that much America can do, I think, to tip the scales at this point. That being said, and this is why, I asked Boris, because it's ultimately up to Ukrainians, right? If they still have will to fight, they will continue to fight. I think they would even continue to fight with reduced support from the United States, which seems like it may be coming because of the Republican victory in 22. So it's hard for me to say, though, exactly what that would look like. And that's why I said you asked the toughest questions of any podcast. So,
Well, I think I think it's it's different when you're like first in the world stage, like all the attention in Ukraine. Now you see it's fading a little bit. Now it's time to maybe change the policy. So let's hope things get well. Well, guys, that was incredible. Thank you so much for your time being here. You guys wanna you have anything coming up, or you wanna promote anything coming up, Zaid? Or people follow you or find you?
Yeah. I mean, so, I use Twitter a fair bit, or X now, I guess, now that we've changed the brand name of Twitter. You can follow me. It's my first name, last name there. And usually I post my articles there, no matter where I'm writing or what I'm doing. So that's a pretty good place. And obviously keep listening to Hatem's podcast, because at this rate I will be on again in 3 years, and hopefully we won't be on another end of another pandemic by then. Hopefully the world will be in a better place.
No, we're definitely gonna get you. We have to get you sooner. We can't wait
Sure.
for a year. It's always a great conversation with you, Boris.
Yeah, at the Boris K online. Tomorrow, will this be out by tomorrow night? Probably not, right?
No.
Okay, so
the
then
night after.
the what?
After that, what do you
Got
have
it.
coming up?
Well, we
Friday?
can say on the 30th, I'll be at the Williams Center. I'll be at Flagship Brewing in Staten Island, December 28th. I'll be at Hudson Valley Comedy Festival the weekend of January 13th, and the weekend of January 20th. That Friday, I'll be headlining in Asheville, and I'll be doing some other shows around Asheville in the South if you're in that area.
Excellent. And yeah, the Comedy Cellar, New Year's Eve coming, and I also have a show on New Year's Eve with Dave Smith. So it's in the Williams Center. If you're interested, you can find tickets. Well, guys, thank you very much and have a great night.